Well, today is going to be very special. Not only are we joined by Pete from Woven and obviously legendary whiskey writer Charlie MacLean, we are also joined at the table by Springbank 50-year-old distilled in 1919. Gentlemen,
a legendary bottling.
Is this something you've ever tried?
I've never tried it. The earliest Springbank I tried was 33 years old, distilled in 1960. This was distilled in 1919.
Yeah, and Pete, is this one you're sort of familiar with? I assume it's not one you try down your local Wetherspoons, no?
I don't know. I don't blend with this often, no.
No, not an everyday malt.
No, first time.
Yeah, this is going to be quite special. So this, as we say, was distilled 1919, bottled 50 years later. This bottle, interestingly, was also re-presented or rebottled in the late 70s, kind of early 80s, as the Springbank 1919. And this was one of only 24 bottles. Each of them were individually numbered. That bottle went on to break several world records for world's most expensive whiskey. I think at one stage,
is that right?
At one stage, I think it reached £250,000.
Wow! But it's the same juice.
Exactly, it's the same juice. This one, often referred to as the pear-shaped Springbank 50 or Springbank 1919, generally sells at auction for about £20,000-25,000. So 10% of the price, but as you say, it's the exact same juice. It's the same size bottle. But because it's not numbered, it's not in the maybe sort of sleeker presentation, it's less sought after by collectors and investors.
But this was the original bottling, right?
This was the original, yes.
Wow. Okay.
So, and it's not a single cask.
No, there's not too many details given. They're not numbered. There's not even strength on it that's visible, but I do know it is bottled at less than 40%.
Oh, really?
It works out at about 37.5%, 66.3.
Because they didn't have to declare the strength in those days.
Yeah.
But they could still call it a whiskey, is that right?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think it was 1990 that as late as that they insisted upon the... maybe a little bit before, but this was bottled in 1969, you see.
Yes, and I think it's obviously Springbank is a distillery that I'm sure the three of us are fairly well acquainted with, and they've always had, a reputation for being very traditional and artisanal and quite sort of quirky in a way. And I think at that time, in the late 60s, to have a single malt and bottle and release it was unusual. For it to be 50 years old was totally unheard of.
I've never heard of it.
Yeah.
I would say unique. I mean, I've never heard of a whiskey at that age, at that bottle at that time, and promoted it. Hardly promoted, but 69, I suppose, they were beginning to promote it. Yeah.
But I think bottles like this are spectacular because it really is history in a bottle. You think, this was distilled in 1919, which was when the Treaty of Versailles was signed.
Yeah, of course.
It's when Babe Ruth signed for, was it the New York Yankees? I'm not a baseball fan, but
I'll take your word for it.
Heard of Babe Ruth? I've heard of Babe Ruth. It's going back a long, long way. Obviously, World War I had finished the year before.
In November the year before, so that was...
Yeah, several months
after. This could be
after
months
that.
after. Wow.
And I think, interestingly as well, is obviously Charlie, I'm sure you can talk it, provide more details, but Campbelltown as a region has such an illustrious history. These days there's 3 distilleries. Back then, in the turn of the 1900s, there was 20 distilleries?
There was about 20 about 1900, but there had been about 30 once upon a time. And in 1920 there were probably about, I would guess about 20, at least 20. Okay. By 1930 there were only 3, and there was Springbank, Scotia, which became Glen Scotia, and Rhea-Clarkin. And Rhea-Clarkin closed in 1932, leaving the last 2. Yeah. And so from being what was universally described as the whiskey capital, it was down to 2 distilleries.
And it was mainly, again, going back to that period of time, it was prohibition in the US, which was perhaps the nail in the coffin for Campbelltown as a thriving whiskey scene, or one of the nails, perhaps?
I think it was there were many reasons. Prohibition was actually quite good for the blended Scotch industry, and Campbelltown has rather fallen out of favour.
Sure.
And I think to some extent, actually, I don't know what you think, Peter, about this, but the Speyside grew as a distilling region. It wasn't even called Speyside, it was just part of Highland in the 1890s. And the style of whiskey made in Speyside was exactly what the blenders wanted, and the blenders were the customers. Whereas previously, from what one can gather, the Campbelltown whiskies were highly variable, you know, and and it's said that the Speyside distillers described the Campbelltown whiskies as stinking fish.
Is that right?
They put out absurd rumours that they were filling into ex-herring barrels. You know,
I love that. That's
funny. I mean, even now, Campbelltown still has that reputation of being quite a difficult.
Well, no, but it's grubby. It's
Yeah.
very traditional, both Springbank and Glen Scotia, and it's got terrific character. You know, it really has. West Highland whiskey. It's
real briny and
love 'em
salinity.
both.
All these things.
I mean, I love blending with Campbelltown whiskies because you do have that, as you put it, grubby, oily, grassy, beeswax
slightly
coming
maritime.
through. Sailing. And for me, I really like blending around those characters because you're able to sort of augment and change and sort of draw out one of those elements really, really nicely. And so Campbelltown whiskies for me are right up there. You know, I've always thought if I could do one blend in the world, it would be Talisker with Springbank. Imagine that.
That is not a beginner's whiskey.
Three more.
Yeah, absolutely.
You won't be able to get either of them.
Nope, can't get either. But I do love the characteristic of Springbank and the flavour profile, and I'm really interested because I've obviously never tasted something of this era.
Get it.
So I know. Sorry, we'll stop the dilly dallying.
Gagging for a dram.
Yeah. So this is a very, very exciting moment.
No, is this an Italian?
So this is with the Italian tack strip over the top. This would have been obviously bottled in Scotland, but then exported to Italy, and now it's made its way back here to Edinburgh. So it's, I think, moments like this, I always think, don't drop it. And also the liquid in here has remained untouched since 1969 until
it's a good fill
right now.
The level's very high.
Yeah, bodes well. I think if it
does.
Yeah, let's give this a try. I'm always worried whiskies of this age, the cork can sometimes be less than.
But have we got a cork? Wow.
We've got a cork.
And what are we expecting with this whiskey in terms of?
I mean, Campbelltown is such a big whiskey.
Yeah.
But a 50-year-old single malt is generally very mellow, and we know this is, I think it's 37% alcohol, so it's under proof. So technically, it's not a wouldn't be allowed.
Standards.
Yeah, so it could taste a bit wet. Charlie, I'll give you the honour of.
Cork's looking in remarkably good nick.
It isn't a good bottle so far.
Now, by colour, they were probably filling into sherry transport casks.
Okay.
Well, they will have been in 1919. The sherry transport casks in those days were made from American oak.
Okay.
And then only later in the 1960s did they become made from European oak. And it's got a deep colour, but the colour is probably not natural because they were allowed, and they did add Paxaret.
Yes.
Okay.
Very small amounts, but that would add sweetness and it would give a deeper colour. Right now.
Sure. For a whiskey of this age, very vibrant, isn't it?
Snuffed wax candles. Snuffed wax. That is fantastic.
Doesn't disappoint. Does it? I was hoping it wouldn't be
as full as
dusty and flat.
That is, but it's the real. It's a flavour, rather an aroma, that is simply not available nowadays.
I find this aroma incredibly hard to find
Yeah.
when blended. I mean, this is one of those almost undescribable snuffed wax candles, really high citrus and pineapple, but absolutely.
But I tell you what, you do find it. this is why this is clearly the real thing, you know, because I was a little bit nervous that it might have been a refilled bottle, but you do find that lovely, it's a really attractive characteristic in blend. Hague, for example, Hague Dimple, sort of pre-war or in the 1950s, blended Scotch, and it comes through. It's more familiar. That wax. The only place you get it now is Clynelish, of course, in a mild way. And by the way, also, and I so recommend it, Aberfeldy, 21 years old, not the younger Aberfeldies, but and the waxiness comes through. But this is absolutely done.
No, are you both having a good time? Are you both glad you came today?
Oh, yeah. And then underneath, so that while I've been rabbiting on, the wax has dissipated, and now I'm getting a sort of it's like a caramel like tablet, you know.
Yeah, it's almost a tropical edge to it as well. It's just so luscious, and
I'm not getting that, but I can imagine. What are you talking about?
So even it reminds me of, like, have you had many 1960s distillate Bowmores that are famous for being very tropical? In addition to that smokiness, there's an element of that that's coming through for me. But it's just so lively. Really, really good.
It really is. It's got plenty of it's not flat, because we were nervous about it being flat.
And it's less than 40%.
Well, the nose is,
the
nose is almost peaking. Like this is, so when you opened the bottle, I
straight away,
I got a whiff and I went, no, it can't be that coming through, and then it is.
The taste is amazing. It's slightly sweet, then slightly sour, slightly salty, slightly grubby, very slightly smoky. Well, not as smoky as I would expect it, but I mean, it's a real panoply of primary tastes.
I suppose at 50 years of age, any sort of raw smokiness is going to be fairly dialed down.
Yes.
That's a very interesting palate, isn't it?
Isn't it?
Almost a full spectrum there.
Yeah.
And it...
Yeah, in fact, you have almost got with a complete, sweet, sour, well, maybe not so much sour, but salty, bitter, and umami, that's savoury. And there's lots of savoury notes there.
I'd almost say it's there's an element to this I love, which is like that slightly chalky, almost minerality coming through, which is, complemented or offset by that. It's a sharpness without being sour. And it's
really is.
Knockout.
Do you think this could have been produced any distillery other than Springbank?
Well, and in those days, with the equipment, etc., available to them, I think that waxy note was very largely to do with poor maintenance, particularly the receiver tanks. I mean, they discovered at Clynelish that the very precious waxiness was a build-up of sort of gunk that going into the spirit receivers. But the flavour profile overall, which embraces all these elements that we were talking about, really is pure Springbank. I mean, it's because joyfully it's not clean. Speyside whiskies, even in these days, would have been much cleaner. They would have been slightly more smoky, but what a character! May I have another little?
You help yourself.
It's a teeny one. Should I just take it?
Yeah.
So kind, really.
Yeah, no, really quite special. And I think, my background in whiskey is in auctions as well, and you hear so much backlash from people saying, all whiskey's meant to be drunk and people shouldn't be collecting it. But imagine if all of these were drunk in 1970, we wouldn't be able to have this opportunity.
Yeah,
so it's a great
it's good
snapshot into the past.
People would have been buying this to keep. It says 50 years old in it, so you can imagine even in 1969, people buying this to say, well, I want to keep this for a special occasion, right? And so it's a special occasion then, and now this is a unicorn.
Yeah, absolutely. But no, a real treat, and obviously a pleasure to share it with you two gentlemen. So
Really, absolutely
yeah,
outstanding.
shall we stop filming and just drink this? Yeah. Cheers, gents. Thank you so much for
Cheers.
sharing this.
Cheers.
Thanks
Thank
so
you
much
so
for
much.
inviting us
been
to
wonderful.
help you taste it. Really. That really is
Wow.
absolutely astonishing.
I think it's real.
It's such
It's
a
definitely real.
It's as good a whiskey as I've ever tasted.